Hello. So today we are doing the fourth part of the 10-part series. Today I'm going to start with evolution. So, but the first part of evolution, not human evolution. So, um, the intro basically into evolution. So, evolution by natural selection. Um, so in this topic, basically, like I said, we're gonna do evolution, and the reason why we do evolution, so the reason why we learn evolution is to see how organisms like came to be like here on this earth. You see, because um, due to some like evidence that some researchers have found, they've seen that they've located some fossil material, meaning bones and stuff of creatures that don't exist right now, right? Like for instance, dinosaurs and stuff. So we want to see how exactly like these creatures relate to like our earth and how the earth basically has changed, right? Because if those creatures do not exist anymore, that means that something in the earth has changed, right? The environment or yeah, because they were extinct. So which means the environment in some sort um became in such a way that these organisms like they cannot survive in these environments. That's why they couldn't go further, right? So we are going to go through these theories of evolution, and the reason why they are also called theories of evolution is because um, they haven't really found substantive empirical evidence proving basically their claims, right? So it's still a theory of evolution. So basically, you're gonna take the theory that best explains evolution, right? Because basically, let's go to this part, explaining basically the what is a theory. So a theory is an explanation of something that has been observed, right, in nature, which can be supported by facts, generalizations, tested hypotheses, models, and laws, right? So as you can see, it's an explanation of something observed in nature, right? So it's not like they have confirmed that, yeah, this is valid the way it is, right? So a theory basically, it's not yet proven. Yeah, that's why it's called a theory. So here with evolution, you're gonna take there are many theories of evolution, right? So you're gonna take um, the theory of evolution that best explains evolution, right? Because there were many scientists really that studied this field, evolution, right? So, what does evolution mean, right? Evolution simply means a change over time, right? So, a change over time. So, you want to see how species evolved over time. Like I said, in the past, we had completely different basically species than what exists today, right? Like different plants, different basically organisms and animals, and so on. So these species they evolve, they changed over time, right? As a result of their environment, right? And this change over time created new species, right? And that's what it means basically. New species evolved, right, from old species, right? So evolution is a process by which organisms develop over time from earlier forms, right? So biological evolution refers to any genetic change in the population, right? So biological evolution refers to any genetic change in the population that is inherited and becomes the characteristics of that population over several generations. So you'll see basically, Mara, I'll explain that after explaining the different theories, right? But you'll see basically what really changes a species, how species evolved, like evolve after here, right? So let's go to genetic evidence and variation, right? So um so basically this topic is also closely related to genetics, right, and variation. Um, the reason why within even species differences, like even within humans, there are differences, right? It's because of this variations, right? So crossing over, random arrangement, random fertilization, random mating, right? So all of these things create this variation, right? This genetic variation among species, right? Because basically crossing over, you remember, this is like to do with meiosis, and random arrangement is still meiosis. Then random fertilization, like we know during human reproduction, um, males have a lot of sperm, right? So they'll release these many sperms, and then these all of these sperms have genetically different materials, right? So it's also random which sperm actually is fertilized with the egg to create the zygote, right? And then random mating between organisms, like even with us, like you're not sure who your mate is going to be, right? So um, also, random mating influences this variation, and then mutation also influences variation, right? So this is just to show basically how exactly like is it that there is variation among a particular species, right? So a species basically is organisms, right, that have the same or similar genetic material, right? Very similar, like for instance, we are the human species, right? Because we have like similar genetic materials as all of us, like as humans, right? And you'll see it's the same also for animals. They can be categorized based on their species, right? And then um now we're starting with these theories of evolution, right? So like I said, theories of evolution have changed over time, right? So there's really two main theories that were used, right? Um, it's Lamarck's rule and Charles Darwin, right? So we're gonna start with the theory basically um that's not used right now at this day and age. So this is the first one that Charles Darwin basically used as his foundation to build his own theory. Mare, that's the theory that we are basically using right now. So we are using Charles Darwin's theory, not Lamarck, right? But you have to know Lamarck's theory. What did Lamarck say? So Lamarckism. So Jean-Baptiste Lamarck was a naturalist and proposed that species were not fixed, but they changed over time, right? So his investigation observed that, okay, so these are the two laws basically that he came up with as a result of his research, and um basically this is what his theory says, right? So his theory says law of use and disuse, right? So Lamarck's theory suggested that animals changed over time in order to survive in a new environment, right? And he argued that if a structure was more used, then a structure became bigger in following like generations, right? So basically, what he proposed was that basically organisms they they basically had these parts, right? These organisms, right? And then as time goes on, um, because of what those organisms wanted, so the intention of those organisms, they could change over time, right? Not because of the environment. That's very important. So his theory, they it looked at basically the intention of the organism. The more the organism did this, the greater it had that. Uh, so the more it did this, the more it had that structure, right? So that's what it says. So for instance, um, he also proposes that a giraffe it had a small neck, right? And as time goes on, the reason why its neck grew is because it wanted to eat from like trees, right? Higher trees. So as time goes on, its neck like increased, right? And things like, for instance, snakes had legs, and because they didn't use their legs, the legs disappeared as time goes on. right? So that's his law of use and disuse. Um, the reason why animals they look like they look, basically the organisms they look the way they look, is because they used more of that organism, and the more you use it, the more it basically you see it within an organism, like within, I mean, a species, a population of organisms. So all I can say is you can see that his explanation of evolution was very rudimentary, right? And we know that that's wrong, right? There's no way snakes had like legs, or giraffes had like short necks, right? So but we can continue. He also said, so that's his law of use and disuse. So like for instance, giraffes have long necks because they're using more of their neck, right? They're trying to reach out of like reach out using their necks, right, to get the fruit from the tree. So that's what he said. And he says this is the second law of inheritance of acquired characteristics. So he said that now these animals that acquired these, so this animal, like for instance the giraffe in that example, that acquired this characteristics, because obviously because it wants to reach the tree, right, its neck will grow. And what he said is that um because now this giraffe, this parent, right, this giraffe is going to mate with another giraffe, this characteristics of a long neck can be passed down to the offspring. So this is what this law of inheritance of acquired characteristics means, right? So it means that now that this giraffe is long, due to this law of use and disuse, so it grew its neck basically using its intention, like I said. Now it can mate with another giraffe and pass on this characteristic that it acquired to other, so basically to offspring, right? And you can see, like I said, that theory is not used anymore, right? So it explains how, okay, right? So like I said, it could be passed down to its offspring. So so this is the example of the law of, so you see giraffe snake. So according to Lamarck, the original giraffe must have found himself in an environment, right, where in order to reach the top of the trees, they continually needed to stretch their necks. Over time, a giraffe could develop a elongated neck, allowing it to get more food. Then parents could pass that elongated neck to their offspring, right? Like I said, this giraffe wanted to reach up, so it grew this long neck, right? It mated, created its offspring. Then its offspring wanted to also reach up, so it also grew this neck. And then that's basically his theory of evolution. And why was Lamarck wrong? So because that's not the theory that we use, right? So they say that Lamarck argued that traits are acquired traits acquired by parents could be passed to offspring, right? He did, however, not provide any mechanism, okay, of how this would happen. So he didn't have basically any evidence that this happened, and that the change happened because organisms wanted it or needed it. Do you see? Then we we now know that changes to organisms can only come about as a result of genetic change, which is then passed on to the offspring, right? So we know that it's genetic change, not this um because the organism wants it or needs it, right? You know that with basically evolution, I'd say, or this is something that you need to also note down, right? That with evolution, the environment is the determiner, not the organism. So the environment determines basically which organisms survive, because it's all about basically survival of the fittest, right? So his basically proposal, his main idea is that organisms they evolved because they wanted to or needed to evolve, right? However, we know that organisms evolve to adapt to the environment. That's basically the premises of Darwin's theory, right? They evolve to adapt to the environment. Then obviously the gene that's most adapt to the environment will survive, and the genes that are not most adapted to the environment will not survive. And as a result, a gene is only like a small change, right? A small variation. And as a result, if you have many of these genes like that changed within a species, then that species has evolved. Mara will explain further what that means. So Charles Darwin theory of evolution is by natural selection. Like I said, natural selection, it's selected by the environment, right? Not because you, not because the of, not because the organism wanted it or needed it. Do you see? It's because of natural selection, because of the environment. So that's his theory, evolution by natural selection. He says that evolution happens by natural selection, right? So these are um, some points basically explaining natural selection. So population can um, produce far more offsprings than needed, right? Sizes of most natural populations and resources remain relatively constant. Yeah, we know that. And then um, there is natural variation among of characteristics among members of the same species, right? We know that. We know even us as humans, we don't have the same exactly the same genes. There is some variation of genes, right? Because of that genetic variation, right? And then some characteristics are inherited and passed on to the next generation, right? So those are the genes that survive. And then based on his observation, Charles Darwin came to three conclusions, right? All organisms are involved in a struggle for survival, right? And only those best suited to the environment would survive. Like I said, they are in a struggle to survive, right? So they are there for survival in the environment, right? And like I said, if you are best suited for the environment, you'll survive not because you want to, right? So it's the gene that's best suited to survive in the environment. Then organisms that survive are more likely to produce because obviously they survive, they will reproduce, I mean, and therefore pass on their useful characteristics onto their offspring, right? But do you see that these genes, these useful characteristics, they didn't come about because of this organism, right? Wanted it or needed it, or because of this organism's intention. They came about as a result of the environment, right? Right. And then over many generations, reproduction between individuals with different genetic makeup um, changes the overall genetic composition of the population. Now, I will explain this further as we go on, right? And like we said, natural selection is the best mechanism, right, suited to explain evolution, right? So those organisms best suited to a particular environment produce the most offspring, right? So, like we said, right? And then some species, okay, are better equipped for the environment, right? Then having favorable traits that are suitable to changing environment. Do you see like what I mean? That natural selection, the focus here, it's the changing environment and whether species can adapt to the changing environment, right? That's what survival means, that you can survive with the changing environment, right? And then these favorable genes, the more they are passed on, right? The more they are passed on, um, so the more the more of these variation of genes are passed on, right? The more a new species is created, right? So the more of so let me give you an example. For instance, let's say you had an organism, right? An organism, right? A, right? That has like certain genes, right? Let's say A has offsprings with B. Ne? A has offsprings with B, right? And C, as a result, their child, right, has what? It has um some genetic what variation different from A, right, and B, right, because they combined, right? So this one has this genetic variation, and let's say in C, right, C has traits that are favorable to the changing environment, right? So let us say maybe see, I don't know, maybe these organisms are some animals, maybe let's say maybe they are wolves or something, some animals, right? So if they produce this offspring, right, that has, let's say, this new gene is um so the ability, right? So this gene is the ability, right? Ability to see in the dark. Let's say that that organisms has now the ability to see clearly in the dark. A and B could see in the dark, but not as clear as C, right? And then let's say D is an offspring of another. So of these organisms. So D also comes from this first line. So this the animal in A and the animal in B is the same animal that produced D, right? So it's the same. So let's say A, B, um, okay, let's call this one G, right? Let's call it G and F, right? So let's say G and F, G, so all of these G, F, A, B, they are from the same species, right? So if they are wolves, they are all wolves. If they are all dogs, they are all dogs, right? So, and they produce this offspring D, right? So this and this are basically, they have a little variation, but they are the same, right? Now, let's say D, in terms of like genetic information, it doesn't have this ability to see clearly in the dark, right? What will happen is that this ability to see in the dark is going to be, as time goes on, is going to be a dominant gene, right? Because it's the one that allows for this species here. It's the one that allows for this species here to exist, right? Unless this species is going to be extinct, right? So this is the ability that's going to allow the species to continue on, right? So as a result, when C mates, let's say with D, C is going to pass on this gene now, this ability to see in the dark, and then this new species as a whole, let's call it E, this new species as a whole now is going to be able to see properly in the dark. And let's say maybe A and B, before that, like the parents that produced A and B, like they did see in the dark, but small, like in a smaller concentration and a smaller percentage. Do you see that? Let's say when this organism started, like in general, it couldn't see in the dark, and as time goes on, like it improved as time goes on, and as a result, now we have this species, this totally species that has um this basically I would say ability to see in the dark, right? And then if, let's say, as time goes on, when that species like started, like the time value the species like started, let's say it accumulates, let's say 5 or 6 of these new traits, like not ability to see only, but maybe ability to produce fur, you know, like it gets new abilities. What what will happen if we have enough abilities, right? If we have like enough abilities that have changed, what will happen? The whole species as a whole changes, right? Because the whole animal as a whole, like it changes, right? If that animal couldn't produce fur and couldn't see the dark and couldn't do it, so it's fundamentally a different organism than than it was, right? However, do you see how it evolved? It evolved using these small traits, right? These small genes, right? As time goes on. So gradually, as time goes on, it changed into a different species. And to prove that the different species, this new species and this old species, um they cannot mate, right? Or even if they do crossbreed, the offspring like will not be able to reproduce. But I'll explain that further, right? So that's basically the theory of natural selection. That's how these organisms came about, right? So they started with these root organisms. So these root organisms are where they started, right? And then they branch off from there on, right? Gaining these traits, right? So how does natural selection work? So there's a lot of variation amongst offspring, like I said, as offspring differ from their parents due, right, due to what crossing over random arrangement. We saw this in meiosis, right? And then when the environment changes or there's competition, right? So this is the environment basically, and the environment, it means everything, right? Basically, environment, it means the food there, the water, the shelter, competition, right? Predators. That's what environment means, right? So then the offspring with characteristics or trait that make them better suited to the new environment or competition will most likely survive and reproduce, right? And as you can see, I'm sure even from way back then, like the weather there was different from what the weather is right now. That's why it can maybe sustain asthma, it can sustain maybe dinosaurs and all of those organisms that lived in the past. And okay, let's continue. The organism without the desired characteristics, right, or trait are less able to survive in the new environment um, or competition, and so will die out, right? And that is extinction, right? And then this means that more offspring in the next generation will have advantageous characteristics, right, to be able to survive in that environment. The next generation will have a higher proportion of individuals with the new characteristic, right? Like as you can see, humans, we didn't exist here on Earth first, right? Like there were no Homo sapiens, right? It was just all of these other organisms and animals, right? And as a result, um, when like basically we came into existence, right? The reason why we came into existence is because we can survive in this new environment, in this new world, right? And then these differences accumulate, and eventually all individuals in a species have a new characteristic or gene. Like I said, it's evolution. When what happened, if enough genes within that population, so when I say population I mean species, within that species, right, within that species changes, if it changes enough, then you've created a new species, a new basically population, right, a new organism, right? So that's basically the theory of natural selection. I hope you get it, right? And then now we are going to go to punctuated equilibrium, right? So this concept also is also, so it was developed by Eldridge, right? So this and Stephen. So this this theory is also accepted in this day and age, right? However, it proposes some, so it has some differences compared to um, um, natural selection, right? So the one of Darwin. So, but the only difference is um, basically the time it takes for a species to change, right? So Darwin proposes that species gradually change over time. So we have these small changes that happen over time, right? And then as a result, because of all of these changes, we have like a new species, right? A new species. So Darwin uses what gradualism, right? Uses gradualism, that an organism changes because of these small changes, and it is accepted. We've we've seen that this law is the one that best explains why organisms, basically how organisms develop, right? Now, Eldridge, right? Eldridge and Stephen, they realized one thing, right? That in some organisms, right? Not all. Obviously, Darwin's gradualism, it applies to most organisms, right? So, in some organisms, right, the phylogenetic, right, tree, right? So the phenotype, physical characteristics, right, they don't match up, right? Because if it's gradual, then we have to clearly see the link, right? The missing link in terms of like fossil fuels and the bones that show us the transition between this organism and that organism, right? However, some organisms are so different from each other, ne? So we can see that there was really no gradualism here, right? So we can see that what really happened is there were long periods of time of no change in that organism, right? And then what happened is that within a short period of time, there was a lot of change, right, in that organism, right? So that's why both of these theories are actually accepted, because natural selection what proposes what an organism changes gradually. So a species, it changes gradually over time, right? And then punctuated equilibrium, for a long period of time there's no change, and then for a short period of time, maybe 50 years, and there's a very there's this very big change, right? That's what it proposes, and both of them accepted. The reason why is because evidence is shown for both, right? It's shown that for some species we can see the missing links, right? How it actually evolved from this species to that species, and then um also gradualism for Darwin's is because we can literally see the missing link, right? Like for instance, human evolution, we can see the missing links, how we progressed from chimps and basically apes and yeah, whatever we are from that family. So it shows how we gradually changed. However, some species there's basically a gap, right? There's basically this gap, right? So yeah, that's punctuated equilibrium, right? Then so okay, this is the differences. We've done this. Um yeah, um so special so now we are going to go to um speciation, right? So basically formation of new species, right? Speciation. So we've like I've been saying throughout the lesson, right? Through evolution, new species are formed, right? New organisms are formed, right? So um what how are these species formed, right? How can you form new species or speciation? So the first type of speciation is geographic speciation, right? So geographic speciation occurs when one part of the population becomes isolated from the parent population due to physical barriers, right? So these physical barriers, like they say, they could be continental drift, rivers, oceans, mountains, and other disturbances such as volcanoes or earthquakes, right? So basically what they are saying is, like we said, right, that if you put organisms in certain like environments, they will develop traits, right, that will help they'll not develop traits that help them better survive that environment will be passed on to um the offspring, right? It's not like they develop traits, right? Like that's Lamarck's approach, right? So Darwin's approach says you don't develop traits, right? The traits that you have, right? So within that organisms, right? These organisms, like I said, within these organisms, there is genetic variation, right? So some of these organisms will be better suited to survive. Do you see this drought? Like this is the parent population. So this is where these lizards come from. So these lizards, they all live together here in this population, right? And then what happened? The environment literally moved them, right? So, like they said, this physical barrier could be anything: continental drift, rivers, oceans. Do you see? It just separates these species now. Now the population has separated, right? So what happens is this parent population will still remain the same, right? Because it's still exposed to the same environment, right? Still exposed to the same environment. However, these other ones, right? These other ones are going to what? They're going to start living into this new environment, right? And then what will happen is that they will mate, right? They will mate, and some will also die off, right? Because of the environment. Their genes are not suitable for the environment. And as time goes on, right? These species here, right? The ones that have like desirable traits, they will pass on the desirable traits to the offspring, right? To better survive this environment, right? This environment here, the desert, right? Rather than this grassy area. And as time goes on, right, this lizard is going to this species basically is going to develop it's not really going to develop. So all of these genes that can survive this environment, these new genes that can survive this environment, like I said here when I explained this thing, do you see that now if enough of these characteristics like they change, we have a differently new species? And it makes sense. Why? Because these two environments are different, right? And as a result, let you see here it's 300 thousand years ago. So obviously, after 150,000 years, right, this thing will be completely different from this type of lizard, right? Because obviously, the ones that initially came, right, over let's say 150,000 years ago, right, they are long dead, long dead, right? And it's been basically this passing down of genes. It's been happening for years and years and years, right? And then as a result, we have of these two different species, right? We have now this lizard that's a different species from this other lizard because of this fundamental change basically in the world, right? So this environmental change in the world. And as you can see, do you see that this also explains why we have many, like, do you see, like, we have animals now, however we have variation among those animals, right? You see you have different types of lions, different types of bears, right? That's because they're exposed to different types of environments, right? And most of these animals, because they are different, right, they became different species, and as a result they cannot interbreed when they come together, because fundamentally now they are different um, from each other, right? So do you see, as time goes on, when now this river now it dries up and they meet up together, these lizards, they are two different species. They may mix, but are genetically unable to breed with each other, right? Because of the evolutionary changes, right? Because this new one evolved from this old one because of the environment it was exposed to, right? So that's basically um um the geographic speciation, right? So, like, the main concept of it is that a population firstly separated by the geographical barrier, right? Like it showed here, it can be continental drift, oceans, or whatever. So it separates these organisms, right? And these organisms cannot mate, right? Or there's no gene flow between these organisms. And these two populations are exposed to different environmental conditions and selective forces, right? Natural selections work independently on both populations simultaneously because they are both on different environments, right? Experiencing different conditions, and therefore the genes that are better suited to adapt to those conditions will basically remain, right? And the ones that don't will die off. And then that's natural selection, and the two populations, they become different from the population, right? So this natural selection happens over many years, right? Many years, and then they become what? Two different species, phenotypically and genotypically. So basically what they say physically, so physically you can see that this is a different species, and then even through genes, even gene wise, it's a different species. Therefore you cannot crossbreed, right? You cannot these two species basically they can't mix, they can't repopulate, right? You see, even if these populations would come together, they would not interbreed, right, with each other, and therefore become different species, right? So that's um speciation, right? So basically speciation is shown by, so if you have this tree, right? This tree, so this phylogenetic tree, right, or cladogram, right? Mare, it's mainly called a phylogenetic tree, right? So when you look at this phylogenetic tree, the part where it splits, right? So every time it splits, and for reference, the phylogenetic tree starts on, like, here on the bottom, right? Just like where a tree starts, a tree is rooted on the ground, right? And then it branches off, right? So even this phylogenetic tree, when you start reading it, it starts on the bottom. So which means the would say the first organism is here at the bottom, and as a result, as time goes on, it will experience these conditions. And here, where you have these things like branch off like this, right? These branches that branch off, do you see here? We start with the root, and when you come here, it branches off, right? The way it branches off is where speciation took place here. right? Because essentially here we had two different species, right? Like the, let's say here it's still the example of lizards, right? Here we have those old lizards, right? Old lizards, right? And then here we have those lizards experience the drought, right? And let's say these lizards that experience the drought, right? There's also a separation between these lizards and there's also a separation between these lizards, right? Let's say now these ones are taken to a place maybe of where these fire and volcanoes, right? Then this one here will be different from also this basically the ones that come here. So speciation takes place when, do you see? So when it happens, these two, it branches off, it splits, right? It splits. Yeah. And that's how you read a phylogenetic tree. Now, as a result of this, so understanding natural selection, right? So as a result of understanding natural selection, humans have exploited basically this rule, right? This rule, right? By taking they've exploited this rule basically on livestock and wildlife. So livestock, wildlife, um and plants, right? So and some crops and plants, right? So and they did it via a process called artificial selection, right? So that one is called natural selection because it's nature that selects, right? So it's the environment that selects basically the gene that's most suited to survive, right? Now with artificial selection is we as humans we select the genes that we feel we want, basically that we want, right? So we are gonna basically do it artificially. That's why it's called artificial selection, because we are the ones that are selecting the genes that we want, right? So favorable genes are selected by the scientists or farmers, right? And then breed out the population with, so and then breed out to produce offspring with those characteristics, right? um and there are many examples, right? There are many examples, like for instance the horse, right? um the way they breed horses, right? They want, in most cases, these horse breeder, they want horses with good genes, right? And also things like plants like corn, for instance, like the mealie that we have, that the mealie that you know, the corn that that you know, right? It's not the corn that existed like years ago. This is a new basically type of corn, a bigger corn that we as humans, I would say, we as humans created via this artificial selection. So we basically isolated like the same way. So we did the same thing that this geographic speciation does, right? But we did it artificial, right? So we separated these genes artificially, right? And that's what happened. Um, that's how we created some of these new animals and new plants, right? Like for instance, dogs are created by dogs were created by humans, right? Because they all originated from this gray wolf, right? So they're created via humans, but they originated from this gray wolf, right? So it was via artificial selection. So they tamed these dogs, right? And then as a result, they were able to produce like varieties of dogs that we see today. Um, just as a side note, the mongrel, so the dog that we see, so setso tse di bonang mo strateng, right? Pavements, wa bona? Yeah. So these dogs, um, basically, so are dogs that were outbreed, so that their genetic variation is far greater than the pure breed dog. So it's basically when a pure breed dog mates with another maybe pure breed dog, right? Mare, they are of like different species, these dogs, right? So the reason why these dogs, like, if you can see, like most of these dogs people don't like them, right? They are just outside the however they can survive, these dogs, like they can survive much better than like pure breeds. They can survive even for longer than um pure breeds, right? Even though they look uglier or they look thinner and yeah, they are fair, don't like they don't really look good, they do survive far better than the pure breed, right? That's why they are healthy, right, and robust, and they don't die easily from natural diseases because their genetic variation is greater, right? So that means that they can better survive the environment, right? And then, like I told you, there's also artificial selection in crops. Do you see that the modern day maize, it comes from this small plant? Do you see how like maize actually grew, right? How we actually grew our maize, right? So this is basically the progression we made in maize as humans, right? So do you see that this maize that we have today is very different from the maize that was naturally there? Do you see? Yeah, that's artificial selection. And then so we know the difference between natural selection and artificial selection, right? So um so reproductive isolation, it prevents two species from mating with each other, right? And making fertile hybrids, right? Even when not separated by geographic means. So, like we said, when these organisms now they join after this geographic speciation, right? These organisms from different species, most of them they cannot interbreed, or even if they do interbreed, their offspring, they cannot like their offspring cannot reproduce, right? Like for instance, the offspring of a tiger and a lion, right? So a liger, right? So a liger cannot reproduce, right? For instance, like that it cannot reproduce, right? And there are many different strategies of this reproductive isolation, right? It's what keeps basically the balance here in the earth, right? Because you cannot just go to maybe a dog and mate with a dog, or a chimp cannot mate with a dog, right? Like that's because fundamentally they are different species, right? And then also breeding at different times of the year. Some species they breed at different times of the year. Like for instance, flowers, right? They pollinate at different times of the year, right? And even with animals, right? They have to be in heat before actually happens, right? Certain courtship behaviors, right? Yeah. So that's just reproductive isolation. What they mean here is just what what strategies does nature use, right, to prevent to prevent reproduction, I mean, right? Because if we had reproduction, interspecies like reproduction, then the, the the world would be scary, right? Yeah, the world would be scary because basically would have like weird things like for instance, that's why a dog and for instance a horse they cannot like breed because imagine like the offspring like from there on, like how will the offspring look? Yeah, so that's why so nature prevents that, right? And then we go to evolution in present times, right? So even things like microorganisms, right? So organisms that we can't really see, like bacteria and viruses, they also evolve, right? They also evolve, right? And um to also survive in the environment. But obviously its environment, it's like your body, and you don't want it there, right? So they also become more powerful, like these bacteria and viruses, right? They change over time. Like for instance, the flu virus has mutated so much, like we have even lost count, but it has mutated over and over again, right? This flu virus. So even this TB has also like mutated to become stronger to be able to survive, right? Right. However, for some of these microorganisms, their survival means our death, right? So yeah, that's why learning about this like how genes work and all, it's very important. So now that's basically explaining what natural selection is, artificial selection, and Yeah, basically starting, that's the theory of evolution is basically starting, right? In our next session, we are going to really look at human evolution, right? So how it came about to human evolution. So today was just basically an introduction of what evolution is and the theories of evolution that exist. So in our next session, we're gonna do human evolution. Thank you.